to this month's ARRA Author Chat, and this month we're chatting with the wonderful Erica Hayes. So
Hello.
Erica, hi Erica.
Hi.
So Erica has actually had quite an interesting life. She has been a law student, an Air Force officer, an editorial assistant, and a musician before finally landing her dream job, which is a fantasy and romance writer. She writes dark paranormal and urban fantasy romance, and her books feature tough, smart heroines and colourful heroes with dark secrets. She hails from Australia, where she drifts from city to city, leaving a trail, in her words, of chaos behind her. Currently, she's terrorising the wilds of Northumberland. So, Erica, you've been a favourite with ARRA readers since your debut novel in 2009. You've been a finalist in the favourite sci-fi, fantasy, futuristic romance category in 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012.
That was awesome.
That's pretty amazing. And in 2010, you were also a finalist in the favourite Australian romance author category. Well done.
Thank you very much. I was so humbled. I was unexpected. That was fantastic. Yeah, it was great. And I had such a great time at the awards night as well. The dinner that was on, that was fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame you couldn't have made this year's ARC.
Yeah, I wanted to. I'm living in England at the moment, for those of you who don't know, so it's a little bit far away, but I wanted to be there. I was so jealous. I saw it all on Twitter and everyone was having such a wonderful time. I'm like, oh, no, I wish to be there. But next time I should be able to make it.
Well, fingers crossed. And good luck at the next round of awards, too. They're about to, the nominations are open at the moment.
Oh yes, I saw that. And this year again, you can make up your own category. I think that's a fabulous idea. Like they've got where people can submit what they think the category should be. I think that's great. Yeah.
It's pretty exciting, some of the categories that are being nominated.
I like that. We'd have to have a sexiest hero award. That should be every year. I think that's mandatory. We should have that. Somebody did suggest that. I'm all for that one.
Oh, well, let's hope it gets through.
Yeah.
Now, Erica, I am not a natural urban fantasy reader. It's not a category that I was familiar with. So for those people who, like myself, have never read urban fantasy, what can we expect with your books? What does urban fantasy mean?
Well, I guess there are two terms that are sort of bandied around, and one is urban fantasy and one is urban fantasy romance, which, as opposed to paranormal romance. And I think your urban fantasy tends to be books like authors like Kerry Arthur, Nalini Singh's Archangel series. It tends to be more focused around the female character, whereas a paranormal romance is perhaps a more hero-centric book. Urban fantasy will feature things like they call them the kick-ass or the kick-butt heroine, lots of vampire hunters, demon hunters, things like that. Lots of very deep world building, things like this. And perhaps not so focused on the relationship, on the romance, as a paranormal romance would be. So you're going to get more subplots. The heroine may have multiple romantic partners, not necessarily at the same time. Sometimes at the same time. If you're Anita Blake, you do them all. But there can be lots of love interests rather than just one. So I guess it's a step towards the fantasy from paranormal romance. And I guess my books tend to be not so romance focused as some other books. So I guess that's why they call them urban fantasy romance or urban fantasy, even though they've all got, except for the science fiction one, they've all got your happy ever after, which is a thing that some urban fantasy books don't have necessarily, is the happy ever after in every book. Then, like for instance, in Kerry Arthur's series of Riley Jensen, I think there's 7 or 8 or 9 books, and the heroine goes through a number of relationships in the course of that series. So that's the kind of thing you can expect from an urban fantasy romance, as opposed to a paranormal romance, which is generally, one book, happy ever after. The characters will be together at the end of that book.
Okay. I was reading once when I was researching about urban fantasy that one of the other aspects is that they tend to have an I focus. And I don't find a lot of books written in the first person. Do you think that changes the reader's experience for, when you're reading in the first person? Does it make a reader connect more with the characters?
Well, I think as a writer it certainly does, and you are correct in that a lot of urban, in fact most of the urban fantasy I think that came out sort of in the last 15 years or so was the heroine first person, so I this and I that. It just sort of, I think there was a trend that started and everybody started doing it, and it just sort of became one of the tropes of the genre almost, is that it'll have a first person heroine. And I think certainly as an author you do get into a different sort of voice and deeper into that character when you're writing in first person, and hopefully that will translate to the reader's experience as well, because you're not necessarily, it's often in paranormal romance you'll have two points of view, you'll have the heroine and you'll have the hero, whereas in urban fantasy often it's only the heroine. In my books I tend to have everybody's point of view, so not everybody does just one, but often if it is a first person character you'll only have the one, so you get very deep into that person's psyche, and it tends to become a lot of them are really psychological thrillers in the background, because you'll get right into that heroine's head and see what she's dealing with from her point of view. So yeah, hopefully it's a deeper reader experience. Yeah.
I certainly noticed. I was reading your latest book, Demon Unchained, and you have both of your male and your female character are both written in the first person. Was that hard to change genders while you were writing it?
Yeah, that's a bit of an odd one. That's the only time I've ever done that. Generally, in my Shadowfair series, which that is part of, I have a first-person heroine and third-person hero, which makes it easier for the reader too to know which one you're talking about. One hopes there's no confusion, but I think it's it was an interesting exercise as an author to try and make those voices distinct, because I don't have a chapter heading. I just start a new chapter and boom, there's a new character, and you need to make sure that the reader understands that. So you really do have to make sure that characters have a distinctive voice, and I hope that I've achieved that. It was good, and I hope it's a fun thing for the reader to experience too, because it isn't that common, I don't think.
No, I've certainly not read many that had both the male and the female character written in the first person, so it was a different read for me.
Well, it's a bit of a horror one, that one. When I call it the zombie book, don't be frightened off. Don't try this at home. Don't be frightened off. He's a reanimated dead person. I prefer to call him a reanimated dead person. He's not a zombie that goes and eats brains and things like that. But he is a dead guy that has been reanimated for nefarious reasons, and part of the book is about how he deals with that. And it does get a bit gross in places. I have been accused of being gross, but hey, anyone who's read any of my other books will know that being gross is not something I have a problem with. So it was a fun book to write.
Well, don't spoil it for me, because I haven't finished reading that one.
No spoilers, no spoilers.
I did fall a little bit in love with a secondary character, Gawain.
I know exactly who you're going to say.
Yeah. Do you ever find, like I've spoken to other authors about their secondary characters, do you ever find that a secondary character sort of starts to weave its way into your head and a spin-off book almost appears?
Well, I don't know about spin-off books, but certainly I have that problem all the time, and my secondary characters are very prominent in a lot of my books, and they get their own points of view, and they get their own little subplots, and they tend to want to be more important than they probably really should be for the sake of a book that's meant to be a romance. Romance. You're reading a romance book. You want to read about the hero and heroine. You don't necessarily want to read pages and pages of stuff about other secondary characters, however interesting they might be. When you're reading, the book of those two characters, you want to read about them. And I do have an issue with that as an author, because I find the secondary characters really fascinating. So sometimes, maybe they do get a bit too much page time. But I hope that they're interesting, because they do add colour and depth to the world, and they are certainly relevant to the plot, even if they do have their own thing going on. Because secondary characters are people too, right? And they have they don't just exist for the sake of the plot that you're writing, and they do have their own world. So I like to have fun with that, yeah.
Well, my heart did break a little bit for him, where I'm up to in the book, so I'm hoping that he gets a little bit of a happy ending for himself, or at least a little bit of love in some form. So again, don't spoil it, because I'm still reading. No spoilers.
I won't. My lips are sealed.
Thank you. I must congratulate you, though, on Demon Unchained. I believe that's been lurking in your drawer since 2009.
It has indeed. Yeah, that's been sort of sitting around for a while, that one. It was my original book too for that series. Like book one, the Shadowfae, I sold that in 2007 or whenever it was, and I got a 2-book deal, and they wanted a second book, and that Demon Chained was what I had. I wrote like a madwoman to finish it. Like the week I got the book deal, I wrote, oh, I better finish this book, and I wrote that. But they were really crazy about, my editor was really crazy about the fairies in my series, and she really wanted book 2 to have a fairy main character. And I'm like, oh, what about this one? And they said, yes, but we really like the fairies. Oh, but this one's got a genie. Yes, but we really like the fairies. So eventually, as an author, you sort of, you know, you read between the lines. So I went and wrote a fairy book, which became Shadow Glass, which is now the 2nd book in the series, and that the demon chain sort of got shoved to one side for a little while. And then the series went on, and it sat there, and the series went on to a 4th book, and that one still sat there. And now that the series has ended with St. Martin's Press, I had the opportunity to put that out, and I sort of looked at it and I thought, it's a bit gross, isn't it? And people said, no, it's not too gross, so there it is, and hopefully people enjoy it. But yeah, so it has been sitting around for a while, that one.
Well, that leads me into a question from one of your readers.
Hello, reader.
Tez Miller wondered whether you had any other upcoming releases or any other books sort of hiding in drawers that we can look forward to.
Well, let me see. I'll just make sure I get this right. The next thing I have coming out is a novella. Actually, I currently have a short story / novella out called Hunter's Blood, and there's a sequel coming out called Hunter's Heart, which is being published by the wonderful people at Amazon. Hooray for the people at Amazon. We all love the people at Amazon. So yeah, that should be coming out in about February, I believe, as an e-book, a Kindle e-book from Amazon Publishing. I've just finished another work in progress, which is an historical fantasy murder mystery. I just wrote the end and polished that up just the other day, so we'll see what happens with that one. And I've got a few other things in the pipeline, but they're sort of secret, so I can't tell you about that yet.
Well, that's good. So we've got some secret things that we can look forward to.
Well, a few things cooking up, yeah.
Now, Erica, the other thing I wanted to know is, excuse me a minute, I'm a bit of a, I've gone into the ebook area, and I've got to say that your book covers are beautiful. For those of you who haven't seen them, have you been able to keep the same artist, or is it just... So that's one of my favourites, Cherry Kisses. I love that cover.
Yeah. No, well, those two you've just shown are my 2 self-published books, so I hire the cover artist for those myself. That first, The Demon Chained, is by a lady called Raven, who does this gorgeous sort of, you know, it's almost like paperback artwork. It's just beautiful, textured sort of art. And the Cherry Kisses is done by a lady named Ida Jansen, who I asked for a lurid urban fantasy cover, and that's what she came up with. And I'm like, yes, that will do. No changes necessary. I love that Cherry Kisses cover. So they're the 2 that I have done as an indie author. All my other covers were done in-house by the publisher. So I have 2 different cover artists there. Where's the book? This one. Those 2. If you can see those ones. The Berkeley ones. They're both done by the same artist. And the Shadowfey ones are all done by a fellow called Craig White, who does a number of fantasy book covers. I can't reach one of those at the moment. So when you're an in-house author, when you're a traditionally published author, you don't get any say really in who your cover artist is. So that's one of the good things about indies. You get to sort of pick and choose what you want it to be like.
Well, Tess has another question for you, and I'm assuming one of the pros, because Tess wants to know what the pros and cons are from your own personal experience of self-publishing. And from what you're saying, one of the pros is you get to choose your own cover artist.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, that is both a good and a bad thing, because I have absolutely no idea what covers should be. Like, I'm a total design numpty, and you know, when you're an indie author, you have to make that decision yourself. You've got no one from the publisher to tell you what it should be. So when you're traditionally published, I guess the danger is they're going to give you a cover you don't like, and there'll be nothing you can do about it. So, you know, there's sort of pros and cons either way with that. I've only done those 2 indie books so far, and it is a lot of work. You've got to do everything yourself or hire somebody to do it. And I guess all the responsibility is on your head, which again is sort of both a good and a bad thing, because you've got no one to blame but yourself if it goes wrong. But it's also nice in a way to have that traditionally published area where you've got you know, people that are going to support you behind you, and you don't have to do everything. So I kind of like both. I think traditional publishing is here to stay, and I think they're learning that along with the rest of indie authors what's good and what's bad for authors, and I think that we're going to end up, most authors I think are going to end up doing both.
Yeah, In a completely left of center sort of spin on this conversation, you've described yourself as a planner, and I don't know about you, but I have a very distinctive work personality and a very different home personality, and it's almost like I'm schizophrenic. Are you a planner? I mean, you've said that you're a nightmare to go on holidays with, so are you a planner both in your home and in your work life?
Probably not to the same extent in my home life, I don't think. I'm a bit sort of more laid back, I guess. And you know, as far as like cleaning the house and things like that, I mean, my office is chaos. You probably can't see. I won't even show you the chaos that is my office. So I'm not a neat person. I don't know if that's supposed to go with being a planner. I do like to plan my books out to the nth degree. It's probably too much, actually. I probably do work that's not strictly necessary, but it makes me feel safe, and it makes me feel like I know where I'm going, and I think for me as an author that's important. But yeah, there's certainly a lot more chaos allowed in my real life, I suppose, as opposed to work life, just because, you know, you can afford a bit more spontaneity, I guess.
And so what comes first for you? Does an individual book come first, or is it the broader story, like through your Shadowfae Chronicles? Like, what came first? Was it there's this whole world with these creatures in it that came first, or was it a particular story that you wanted to tell, and then the overarching world, I guess, came into play? What came first?
For that particular one, it was the first story. It was the book. It was that character of Jade. For those of you who don't know, my first book, Shadowfae, is about a succubus, an urban fantasy romance about a succubus called Jade. And she was what came into my mind first, because I'd read other books about succubi, and I'm like, you know, they've got it too easy. It must actually really be a terrible job having to have sex with people, you know, and kill them and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to write a gritty succubus book, and Shadowfae was what came out, and I think most people would agree that it's pretty gritty. It wasn't actually meant to be like that. Like I wanted it to be realistic, but my initial idea that it was going to be Disney. There were going to be, you know, purple bubbling potions and Tinkerbell and things like that, and that's totally not what came out. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. But yeah, the world really grew out of that once I saw, you know, who was who in the zoo, and that just sort of exploded into this whole world of characters and people. Whereas my second series, the Seven Signs, the one about fallen angels and demons and the apocalypse, that was a series idea. And, you know, because I thought, oh, how cool would it be if demons hijacked the apocalypse and turned it to their own ends and wanted to dig Satan out of the pit and end the world? And that was my idea. And then I had to go back and go, well, who are the characters that populate this world? You know, how am I going to get a romance out of this if the world's going to end? No spoilers, by the way. I'm not telling you whether the world ends at the end or not. So, you know, I think it's different for every book. I think the ideas that come, we're at the mercy of the ideas that come, and sometimes they're a person, and sometimes they're a scene, and sometimes they're an entire series, and you just sort of have to work with that.
I'm actually reading two of your books at once, and so I'm reading Demon Unchained, and I'm also reading Dragonfly, and I've got to say that at the moment Dragonfly is winning, and I think that's my sci-fi, going back to my roots of my sci-fi fantasy genre. Like, my favourite author of all time is Anne McCaffrey, so I'm really enjoying Dragonfly. How do you you know, move from something like Dragonfly to Shadowfae to to the Hunters series? You know, how do you switch from these different worlds?
Well, I think it's interesting you say that, because I think it's more really for me about the kind of book that I'm writing. Like, Dragonfly is very much an action story. If you compare that to Demon Chained, there's a lot more action. There's a lot more, you know. It's an urban fantasy in space. It's not so focused on the romance necessarily. It's about the lead female character. She's an interstellar spy, and it's about where she goes and what she does. And it's still an emotional book, but it's less of an emotional focus. And I think that as an author, I just sort of get immersed in the world through the character, I think, and it's kind of hard to explain, I guess. They must seem very different from a reader's perspective. Like, here's spaceships and ray guns, and over here there's, you know, zombies and demons and, you know, glittery fairies and things. And I guess for a writer, it's the same process. It's just different toys, same game, different toys, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but me personally, I only write one book at a time. I'm not one of these authors who can work on 3 different projects, you know, from day to day. I write one book at a time, and then it's finished, and I put that aside and I move on to the next. So that makes it easier, I think, to switch between worlds.
Yeah, so done, finished, move on to the next one.
Yeah, that's the way it works for me. I know. I wish I could work on more than one thing at a time, but I think that's the exact problem I think that you're talking about, is that the ideas just start to collide, and the world loses cohesion in my mind, I think, if I start to, you know, follow plot bunnies, as they say.
Yeah. Well, fun question for you. If you could have anyone to dinner, dead or alive, who would you invite?
Oh, people often ask the dinner party question. You know, I don't know, there's so many interesting people in the history of creation, I suppose. There's God. Can I have him? Is he around, or her? Can I have them? That would be interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you're available, God, that would be nice. You know, tonight, 7:30, my place. There are so many historical figures I'd love to talk to, like, you know, just people from history, and go, what really did happen, you know, at the Battle of Hastings, or, you know, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, or any. I'm a bit of a history buff. I could just go nuts with that question. There's no one answer. Or fictional characters, you know. I'd love to talk to some Dracula. I'll have Dracula to dinner. Yes, especially if he looks like Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. That'd be great.
Dracula and God at the same table. That could be interesting.
Hey, that would be great. Yeah, all right. It's a date.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Erica. It's been fascinating.
Already, I was just starting to have fun. No, thank you so much for organising, and thanks everybody for watching the video. And I hope you enjoy my books if you read them. Thank you very much.